You've hit a plateau in your training. You want to know why? Maybe because you're not deloading. So here are 5 ways on how you can deload effectively for progress. So let's say you've been training for some time and you hit a plateau, a wall where you can't actually push your loads any further. In fact, you might feel tired, drained, demotivated, or not even wanting to go to the gym. Now, if that sounds like you, one of the main reasons why this may be the case is because you haven't deloaded. So this word, deload, seems to be thrown around. Not many people know what it actually means, and it may be actually used quite carelessly. I want to explain what a deload is. Simply speaking, a deload really is to unload or to lower the weights of what you're doing, as its name suggests. Now, why do you do that? A deload happens because it is a planned rest for the body. Now remember, you are only as effective as your rest. You are only as effective in terms of your gains as much as you can allow your body to recover. We are all geared towards training hard, pushing harder. May the last man that crawls out of this gym win. We all have that mentality. It's train hard, kill yourself, or go home. However, sometimes pushing yourself harder every single session is not the key to progress, but deloading could be your answer. So how do you deload a program? Do you wait till you are completely drained? Do you wait till you hit the plateau and you cannot push anymore before you start to deload? No, a deload can be planned in advance so you don't overreach with regards to your nervous system or your muscular system. Here are 5 ways on how you can effectively deload within a program to make sure that you progress in your gains. The first way to deload is, as its name suggests, to lower the load, to deload. So a very common way of deloading is actually to do whatever you typically do within your program. However, instead of performing the same loads or trying to push those loads incrementally every single session, for a particular session or a series of sessions, you lower the weight. You drop the weight that you typically use and you allow your body to rest by doing lighter weights, nevertheless performing exactly how you perform the exercise itself. This gives your muscular system a recovery or a rest, so much so that you are able to progress in your next bout of training sessions. Now, the second way of deloading is probably my favorite way of doing so, and that is to maintain the load while dropping the overall number of sets and reps that you might be performing. So really to decrease the overall volume. Now, why is this the case? Now, typically when someone overtrains, this is not purely because of sort of the loads that they are pressing, but often because of the accumulated tonnages of what they're lifting throughout the entire session, which may mean that they continually push themselves by increasing the number of reps, increasing the number of sets, and that all builds up. In fact, if you do too many warm-up sets, that also adds to the overall volume of what you're doing. And this can be a problem. So a great way of deloading is actually to keep the load of what you're doing, but decreasing the volume. Now, here's a great way of how you can focus on this. If you typically do 4 sets of an exercise, during a deload phase, you might keep the same weight of what you were doing, so don't drop the weight. However, drop the total number of sets from 4 to 2. A typical deload is about 50 to 60% of your overall volume that you perform. So think of the number of exercises that you do, think of the number of sets that you do, half that. Give yourself a recovery by halving the total volume, and you'll be surprised that the moment you come back to the movements again after you've taken the planned deload, how much stronger and more effective you will be in your progress. Point number 3, the third way on how you guys can deload is by actually incorporating point number 1 and 2, which is to lower the total volume of what you're doing and at the same time lower the load. Now, when would you implement such a technique? By lowering both the load and the volume at the same time. Well, you can do that if you're someone that has actually trained until you really hit that wall, where you have kind of moved into sort of chronic fatigue, not ideal, or you've trained till you've got injured, again, not ideal, or you've trained to so much so that your nervous system is so fatigued and you actually don't look forward to going to the gym anymore. You are completely demotivated. Now, I don't like to see an individual train till they get to that point. It just really tells me that they're not focused on recovery. And recovery is the key to how you keep progressing. So if you've hit that state, then maybe lowering the volume and lowering the weight could be a method for you to deload. This method will also work if you wanted to focus more on technique. So lowering the volume and the weight, but really focusing meticulously on a form or technique or a particular lift just to get that spot on and correct could be a great way of doing so as well. But in any case, while such a technique may be effective for those two scenarios that I mentioned, for someone like myself, I found it extremely difficult to actually get back to my original weights that I lifted and actually to supersede that if I took this route of lowering the weight as well as the volume for a period of time. So for someone like myself, such a method is probably not as effective as keeping the intensity while lowering the total volume. The fourth way of deloading is actually to take a complete break. Now, when I say complete break, don't have the idea that you're sitting in front of a couch, flicking controls, watching Netflix with a packet of Doritos. Typically, it's not the sort of recovery that I'm talking about. And in fact, if you're the sort of individual that loves to push yourself, then taking a complete break like that could actually be more of a mental strain than it is helping your body. What I'm talking about here as a complete break would mean to step away from the weights and implementing a form of active recovery that actually helps to regulate your parasympathetic nervous system. So it could be walking. It could be walking at the beach. It could be grounding your feet amidst nature, looking at greenery. It could be yoga. It could be any of these activities that will calm you down, but you're still actively doing an activity as opposed to doing nothing. So taking a break completely from the gym and actually finding a parasympathetic activity can be a great way to deload. The fifth way of deloading, point number 5, is to start a new program. Often when you start a new program, you are embarking upon something that you're unsure about with regards to the exercises that is being performed. Often it's to do with choosing the right weight. So you may either underestimate yourself and often also overestimate yourself. Trying to find that weight, that balance, that movement from machine to machine, in fact, understanding the tempo, how fast or how slow you're meant to move a weight, can often take a little bit of time. So when you start a new program, you are in fact deloading. You are not choosing a maximal weight that you are performing for the number of reps. You are trying to ascertain what weights you should be doing. And often when you do underestimate yourself, you're not doing the exact load that you should be doing. That's a form of deloading. So a great way to deload, whether it's yourself or a client, is actually to introduce a new program. In the first week or even 2 weeks of doing a new program, that serves as an effective deload before they build up to the optimal weight that they should be using for the program itself. So maybe your solution is, instead of sticking to the same old program that you've been sticking with for X amount of months, start a new program. Give yourself a new lease of movements, reps, tempos that allows you to deload effectively. So here it is, the 5 points you need to know for effective deloading. Point number 1, lower the load while keeping the overall volume of what you're doing. Point number 2, keep the load, same weights, but lower the volume of what you're doing. Drop the number of sets. I find this to be the most effective way of deloading. Point number 3, lower both the load as well as the volume of what you're doing. Point number 4, take a complete break. Choose something that would help your parasympathetic system. And the last point, point number 5, is to start a new program. So guys, if you have never tried these ways of deloading before, and if you've hit that plateau, maybe now's the time that you explore ways on how you can deload, see what works for you, and how you can actually get back on the progress train. Well, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you will be able to implement some of these deloading techniques. Make sure you add your comments below and tell me how you go with it. I'd love to hear from you. Looking forward to seeing you in our next video.